Westchester County Human Rights Commission. I'm joined with Civil Rights Attorney Mayo Bartlett. We will be your MCs this morning. It's wonderful to see so many friends for a positive and uplifting moment in our time. We have a fun program today. We're going to be mixing up the program agenda a little bit to keep you on your toes. So Mayo and I will introduce the speakers. But I think everybody's here today to celebrate Paul and Orial Red. They were both giants in our community, but they were also giants in the fight for housing discrimination.
No, not at all.
The world honestly needs more Pauls and more Orials. Mayo and I had the privilege of serving with Paul Red on the Westchester County Human Rights Commission. We learned from him, his wisdom, and his example. 2 years ago, the County Human Rights Commission did a program in partnership with the Rye Human Rights Commission at the Rye Library, honoring the Reds and honoring their work to advance civil rights. Paul Red Jr., who's here this evening, or this afternoon, I don't see Paul Red Jr. There he is. He spoke that night, and he was very eloquent about his parents' persistence, and I want to talk a little bit about that. When I think about Paul and Orial Red, two words come to mind: courage and tenacity. And here's why. Paul and Orial wanted to live in a home at the Rye Colony. It's a city that they lived in, their family lived in for 4 generations. But their application was denied. They filed a racial discrimination complaint in New York State, and it was dismissed because at that time in 1961, the law did not cover discrimination in public homes, private homes. So most people would have stopped there. And there's a wonderful documentary about Paul and Orial Red, and in the documentary, it's relayed that somebody said to Paul, in sum or substance, be patient. Things take time. And I still remember what Paul said. He said, you want me to wait for something that you've been enjoying your whole life?
That's right.
And Paul and Orial did not wait. They fought, and they fought with tenacity. They went to the Rye City Council. They went to the then New York State Attorney General Louis Lefkowitz. They took part in an antitrust lawsuit, and they sought to revoke Rye Colony's charter over their alleged discriminatory practices. They even enlisted distinguished attorney William Kunstler to represent them in what would be his first civil rights case. And they did all of this while they were receiving threats to their personal safety and their family safety. In 1961, New York State passed the Baker-Metcalf Act, also known as the Paul Red Bill. It prohibited housing discrimination in private dwellings. What did Paul and Orial do? They wait? No. Day one, they filed a complaint about housing discrimination. And after they settled their case, they finally moved into the Rye Colony. And it's important to remember, they didn't do this by themselves. They had allies like Dorothy Sterling, whose own family faced housing discrimination in Pelham. And she helped Paul and Orial find a home and fight against discrimination. When Paul and Orial would go to see a home and they were told there's nothing available, Dorothy Sterling would go. And surely enough, the home was available. And then Paul and Orial would go with Dorothy. So as we dedicate this street in honor of Paul and Orial today, let's lift up the legacy of their fight and think of the 3 lessons that I take away, which is tenacity, courage, and allyship. And I think all 3 of those things are as relevant as ever today. So I want to turn it over to Mayo, and he'll start us off with our program.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So like Tejash, I was also very fortunate to have been able to work with Paul and to know Paul and Orial and their family. But also I would say that I've been tremendously blessed to have had them in my life outside of the human rights effort. Paul Red knew my father-in-law very, very well, Ed Randall, and would always ask about Ed Randall, who worked in the city of Rye. And Ed would always ask about Paul. But I think it's just as, first of all, I want to just comment on how wonderful it is that the city of Rye has taken steps to recognize the Reds. And in doing so, are acknowledging a difficult and unflattering part of Rye's history. And that's happening in an age where there's an effort to scrub Harriet Tubman from the Underground Railroad. There's an effort to scrub the Tuskegee Airmen from military service. So when you look at all of the things that we are able to enjoy quite often it's not through our efforts alone. It's almost exclusively not through our efforts alone. And quite often we don't know anything about the people who paved the way for us to be able to do the things and to enjoy the benefits and freedoms that we have. So when you stop and think about Paul and Orial Red and their family, think about Paul being a child living in a house where there are threats, where, you know, in a time where Medgar Evers is being killed, in a time where you're coming off the heels of civil rights leaders who literally lost their lives for trying to fight for freedom, and having the fortitude to fight for what you know is correct, and as Tejash said, for not simply waiting, but then after that, continuing to engage in an effort to help other people, because that's who the Reds are. Okay, they didn't just stop because they got what they were seeking. They continued to fight. So you have the Red Act, which allows everybody to have the idea and the belief and the knowledge that you should be free from discrimination when you are engaging in a search for housing. How wonderful is that? So people benefit from that who might have been opponents of Paul and Orial Red, but yet they can still rest assured knowing that they're not going to be discriminated against, and if they are, that there are going to be laws that exist to protect them. And then after all of that, when I think of them, I certainly think of courage, but I think of love, because their effort was never an effort out of anger. Now, it certainly wasn't that they were pleased that they had to engage in this fight, and by the way, they didn't have to, but that they chose to engage in this lifelong battle. But they chose to do it in such a way that if you were a person who was in need in Westchester County, in New York State, or any place where they could impact you, they would. You had an ally in the Reds. So I just really am so thankful that we are here to recognize their effort, and also to realize that although some of us think that maybe we've been here for a while, somebody might be 100 years old here, that's a moment. It's a blink of an eye in history. And what the Reds went through was not ancient history. It was not that long ago. It really wasn't. So as we were able to sit and work together on the Human Rights Commission, fighting for people who were seeking to have rights that were same-sex relationships, and that may not have been their individual fight, they picked it up as if it was. So they stood for each and every individual. It didn't matter who you were, what you were going through. So I'm extremely thankful to be here today to celebrate the Reds, and hopefully to explore how we can move their vision forward. And now it's my sincere honor to welcome Ingram Taylor.